In this channel, you'll only get basically stuff that is backed by research and good mechanistic research that shows a strong inference where you can actually see if you repeat the same thing, you get a similar result. So you affect that. That is a bit reductionist, I know, but it actually elucidates, gives us an idea of what's actually happening. Then you have to sort of understand how all these interactions happen within the physiology. Then it makes more sense. And that's what I try and do with my videos, to explain and demystify some of these processes within the human physiology. Problem is with people like Salad Boy, they tend to, they're driven by an agenda. I don't really care about that agenda, because for me, coming from a situation of a cardiovascular disease, I just wanted to work out what works and what doesn't. And my foundation stone that I actually created, because most of the science out there is problematic and questionable and very poor. As the ex-New England Journal of Medicine chief editor, when she left, she said she was so disgusted when she resigned from the magazine that she said 95% of the stuff that we actually publish cannot be replicated. That means you can't repeat. You do a study, but no other research can replicate it. That only happens in nutrition, where 95% of the stuff is junk, excrement. It's garbage. Can't be even replicated. It's useless. In physics, that's not the case. Somebody can do an experiment. Another researcher on the other side of the planet can do the same experiment and replicate the same thing and confirm, or a number of researchers can do the same experiment, not confirm what the first researcher, and so that becomes an invalid hypothesis, because all these other people, that person may have had poor calibration of his equipment or whatever. But the other ones, that's why the other ones are doing the same stuff to confirm or not confirm. When it comes to nutritional research, you can't confirm anything. It's so shoddy, so poor and useless. That's why we don't rely on it. Rick, me and Bart basically say, we look at the N15 data. We look at the archaeological evidence, thousands and thousands of years of bones. That means the collagen, long bones. We look at the collagen of those long bones, and we find, because remember, bones are mineralized collagen, we find basically high N15, which means, and delta 13, which indicates delta 13 means that the animal was eating grasses, C4 grasses, which basically means that was a ruminant eating grasses. That was the majority of the source of the N15, the protein source, which is the N15, the nitrogen 15. 14 would indicate plants. And when 20,000 years ago we started consuming slightly more plants, and then into the agricultural era, that's when the nitrogen 14 went up. And those populations started showing, little white of iron deficiency on their scalp, and all sorts of other, things like rickets and all sorts of other problems, malformations or whatever else, telling you quite clearly the more we shift towards plants, the more health problems we have. We know this. We've done the modern experiment. The modern experiment was, let's go back, 1977, the new guidelines come out, go low fat. We saw what happened. We've done the experiment now in the last, what is it? Slightly nearly 50 years now, or getting close to that. So what did we find? It's 40 plus, 40 plus years. So what did we find? It didn't work. "45 years to be precise." It didn't work. The experiment failed, because that's more than one generation. 35 years is one generation, or 30, or 33. Maybe it's 33. Can't remember these things. I think it's 33. Yeah, 33. So it's more than one generation. We've done the experiment. We know that basically it's a bust. That whole hypothesis about low fat, it's a bust. Because if we go back, when we were consuming 2/3 animal foods and 1/3 pre-refrigeration, so we couldn't store a lot of this sort of stuff, so we couldn't have it all year round, fruit in particular. You could only have it seasonally. And to send it with aeroplane and all that, it was much more expensive back then. There wasn't a lot of flights flying stuff around produce, so you only could have regional, seasonal fruit, fructose, and for the rest of the year you had some starch here and there with potatoes and stuff like that, and a lot of glycogen, let's say, depleting activities, because people were more physically active. They were basically doing manual work mostly. So that's the sort of difference. Come to the modern era, we go full kibble. Things have gone to hell in a handbasket. And a lot of these people, that ignore these fundamental things. When we look at the Maasai, when we look at the Inuit, when we look at all these traditional societies that primarily focus on animal foods, we don't see the health problems. Not at all. We see well-regulated immune systems and everything, not even most of these diseases. Many pathogens in their environment, but we see them robust. And only the kids that come back to the tribal areas from the Maasai schools that are eating kibble and stuff like that and not getting enough sunlight to get enough vitamin D, they have then problems in dealing with pathogens when they get back to their families on their holidays. Surprise, surprise. So, yeah, it's, we base ourselves on a foundation where it's baked into the bones. N15 is baked into the bones. We know that humans were hypercarnivores and supercarnivores for most of their existence. It's only in the last 3,500 years which we've gone full kibble. And the more kibble we go, the more unhealthy we are, the shorter we are, the more health problems we have, the more facial malformations and all sorts of other things we have. That's the reality. That's what we can see from the archaeological evidence of bone structures and tissue. So the rest is sort of nonsensical. And when I see Mary Ruddock, in those tribal areas, and she's next to an old lady that's 122, she said, but even if she's 100, even if they're 20 years, but I don't think that they're going to be that far out. Let's say, for argument's sake, they really got her age by 20 years. It's usually a couple of years, mostly. And I know this from Greece and all that, some of the records when people, their child was born, and then a couple of years later, the person would go and actually register the child, So usually the child was older and it was registered as, at that time. And that's when their birthday and everything was registered. So, or when people could remember. So there's always going to be a bit of a discrepancy of a couple of years, but it's not going to be decades, only a couple of years. So people make too much fuss about that. And pretty much that's what used to happen. Now, this lady was jumping up and down. Now, I don't know, they're not, some 50-year-olds can't do that in our modern society without breaking a bone or breaking a hip or whatever. She was jumping up and down at that age. That shows robustness. That shows health on an ancestral diet, on a mostly ancestral diet of the modern era that some of these tribal people can do because of their circumstances. But generally speaking, the Maasai in particular, it's basically dairy and meat, which is pretty much 100% animal based. So carnivore, pretty much.